drafted or did you enlist?
Well, I enlisted, technically. Should we mention the fact that we're repeating this? If we sound a little bit stilted,
Yeah.
it'll be on the tape. Um, I was an officer. I was a commissioned officer, and I attended officer candidate school. So I enlisted voluntarily to go to officer candidate school, and upon the end of that, I was commissioned.
Where were you living at the time?
At the time that I volunteered, I was technically a resident of my home of Pompano Beach, Florida, but I was actually away at college, so I wasn't in Pompano Beach. As far as the Navy's concerned, I came from Pompano Beach.
Why did you join?
Basically, I needed a job. I was getting ready to graduate from college, and I looked around at the options and the careers, and it seemed exciting.
Why did you pick the service branch you joined?
I've asked myself that many times. I don't really think there was ever any question about it. I guess I feel that I had some sort of emotional or subconscious attachment to the Navy. I never in my life considered the Army. It just wasn't even a question. The Air Force and the Navy both had appeal from a technical, lots of machinery type, but I wasn't really ever interested in being a pilot. So I think a lot of people who are interested in the Air Force envision flying a plane. I didn't want to do that, either in the Air Force or the Navy. So was a Navy recruiter on campus for a job fair. Stopped and talked to him. Filled out some papers. One thing led to another. Feels like I just said all this 10 minutes ago.
Where was I? Do you recall your first days after enlisting?
I recall very, very well. I reported to Newport, Rhode Island for officer candidate school. And every time a new class comes in, it's a very large crunch, a whole bunch of people coming at once. It even began before we got on base. We had too many people in the airport. We flew to Providence, and they gave us a commuter hop from Providence down to Newport. And where the local commuter airline normally has, a few people at a time, they've got a couple hundred coming in on the day a class starts. So they hired cabs and put us in cabs for a 45-minute ride to get to Newport.
Tell me about your boot camp or basic training.
Okay. Officer candidate school is 16 weeks or 4 months, during which you do some of the basic military training that you might do in boot camp. There's some of it you don't do. For instance, we had significantly less physical training, physical conditioning. We didn't have to take mile-long hikes or jogs or anything like that. It's a lot of mental stress, a lot of pushing you to see how you'll react when you're tired and worn out. There are some games, some picayune stuff that doesn't really matter. It's a high-stress environment, but they have it set up in a pretty good system. The first week is what they call Hell Week, and they're very, very hard on you. The very first day, came down the hall probably 4 in the morning with a garbage can, kicking it down the hall and beating on the doors, and it just jolted you awake. Silly room inspections, silly stand in line uniform inspections, time after time. Supposed punishments made up on almost no pretext at all. Hours of marching. They do that for a week, and then at the end, and it's all volunteer. Almost everyone who was there was free to quit, and a lot did during that first week. And then after that first week, it got a lot more reasonable. And reasonable from a civilian point of view? No way. But the final 15 weeks after that first week, when they let off you at the end of that first week, it was much more palatable. I mean, you were so browbeaten by then that when they relaxed to the normal level of regimented, it wasn't so bad. We had room inspection twice a week. We had to march literally everywhere we went. If you wanted to go eat and it was time to eat, you had to get together 5 or 6 other people so you could form up a unit and march, because it was the only way you're allowed to go to the chow hall. Stupid stuff like that. But you didn't mind it. After a whole week, you just really didn't mind that. We took classes, 6 or 7 hours of class a day. And they weren't useless or wasted, but they really weren't the point. That isn't why we were there. The stuff we learned was good to know stuff, but we were there for the regimenting and the military training.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
I do. I remember several of them very well. But to understand this, you have to understand that at Officer Candidate School, it's pretty much a student-run organization. That is to say, they have two classes. They have an upper class and a junior class, and the upper class runs the training. So you go there for 16 weeks, half the way through, the upper class graduates and goes away, and you become the upper class. And people in your own company and in your own ranks run the student body for training purposes. So the people that I remember well were people in my own company. I remember a few outside, but not really that much. Told you about Kevin Winston, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember what I already said on this tape when the tape wasn't taping.
I think it's got it now.
I think it's got it now too. My company commander was a man by the name of Kevin Wensing, and when we graduated, he went into public affairs. And I even still today will occasionally read in the newspaper a press article. Navy spokesman Captain Kevin Wensing. Oh, I know him.
That is so neat.
That means he's still in.
Yeah. Makes me wonder if I'll ever read about my teachers. Probably not, but. You served in the Persian Gulf, correct?
I did, and as we said, there's a point of confusion here to sort out right away. I served in the Persian Gulf. I served in combat in the Persian Gulf, but I was not there in the Gulf during the Persian Gulf War. I was there before then, in 1983, and again in 1985 during the Iran-Iraq War, when, particularly, America was not at war. We were not shooting anybody. We're not supposed to be. I was also in the Navy during the Persian Gulf War, but I spent those years, just by happenstance, I was on shore duty in Hawaii.
Okay. Now, could you tell me about both of those during this
Okay.
interview?
In the Persian Gulf, I was aboard a ship, the USS Antrim, and we took 2 cruises. Actually, when I reported to the ship, it was already in the Gulf. I flew by air out through Qatar, as you've been hearing about in the Iraq War just recently, and that was a change of planes into Bahrain. The U.S. Navy has a Navy base in Bahrain. And I got on board the ship there, finished out that cruise, did a bunch of other stuff. Later the ship took another deployment and went back out to the Persian Gulf, and while I was there, I transferred off the ship and flew back home. So I've flown to Bahrain and back. Of course, it was 3.5 years apart that I did the 2 legs of the trip, but that's what I did during the Gulf War, during my time in the Persian Gulf. During the Persian Gulf War, I was on a shore assignment. It just happened to be I was assigned to Navy Communications. I was at a radio station in Pearl Harbor.
Okay. Tell me about your job duties.
Okay, on board Antrim, I was what's called a division officer. The captain, of course, is the command of the ship, and the number 2 in command is the XO. And then working directly into the XO, there are, on that ship, 4 people, and then each of those 4, we call them department heads, has 3 or 4 division officers working for him. You'll excuse me while I say him repeatedly, because there wasn't much gender integration back then. There were women in the Navy, there were a lot of them, but not on combatant ships. So all my pronouns will be masculine. Among the 20 or so, 19, I think, maybe 18 or 19 division officers, I was one of them. I was one of the more senior, just because I had more years in at that point. So it's fair to say that I was among the top half dozen or so in rank on board a ship of 210 people. I just remembered something. We had a helicopter on board, so we were not 210, we were like 240, and I might not have been in the top half dozen, top 9. Okay, so close. I forgot we had a helicopter on board. Yeah. Helicopter's not part of the ship. It's temporarily attached, and then it comes in with its own maintenance crew and pilots.
Now, is that just a regular combat ship, or did it have the airship on it?
Now this is just what you would think of as a regular combat ship. We called them frigates. Brings to mind John Paul Jones and Constitution and Sail and stuff like that. The frigate is just the smallest. I was about to say it's the smallest class of warship. It's not the smallest. It's the smallest generally considered full ocean going. The one that's smaller than a frigate is a corvette. But corvettes don't go to sea for months at a time. Nations like Sweden and Denmark, that's the biggest ships they operate. Frigates are a size up from that's destroyer, up from that's cruiser.
Okay. And can you tell me about when you were stationed in Hawaii? What your duties were there?
When I was in Hawaii, I had completed my 3rd shipboard assignment, and it was time for a shore tour. I very much wanted to stay in Hawaii, and the people in Washington found me a job at the radio station there. Again, so many terms I'd better explain or you'll get the wrong impression. When I say radio station, we did not broadcast any music or news or other programming. Ships at sea use radio to communicate. I've done that for a long time. Fortunately, I can give you a very handy analogy in today's world if you think of email. But before we had email on the ships, as they have now today, all the message traffic was done by radio message. You could think of telegrams, if you will. And the Navy commands ashore, the naval base, the repair yard, even the hospital, the pay center, everybody ashore has to have radio communications because it's how the Navy gets work done. And I worked for the Naval Area Master Station in Hawaii, which ran all the shore radio communications in the Hawaiian Islands. And it was made up of various centers here and there. I was the officer in charge of the communications center at Pearl Harbor, which is to say that when the ships would come into port, they didn't want to have to keep a staff in their radio room, so they would transfer their radio guard, their listening watch, over to us, and the computers would reroute all their radio messages to us instead of to them, and they would come over to our front window, like a bank teller window, and pick up a satchel full of messages a couple times a day. It was a 24-hour day operation, 7 days a week. I had a crew of 140 sailors, and I was the officer in charge, which is to say, if it was a problem, it was my problem. And then I worked for a man who was a Navy captain, and he was responsible for all of the centers like that around the island. And also he was responsible for the radio communications that they did. The radio station itself did operate radios, the radios that transmitted the messages that would go out to the ships at sea.
Was it very difficult? Was it easy or?
Well, when I was in the communication station, is that the one we're asking about? You have to understand that within the Navy there are many fields and many branches of activity. The naval communications is a field that is a specialty. So some people go and do communications and that's all they do their whole career, both officer and enlisted. Although enlisted people who get into communications stay there a career is more common. Most of the officers who do naval communications, they go in and out, in and out. My career path was surface ships. I drove ships. That doesn't give you much opportunity for shore assignment. So when you take a shore assignment, they kind of put you somewhere else. So I worked in naval communications for 2.5 years. While I was doing that, almost everyone around me was career communications. That's all they had done. That's all they were ever going to do. We just mentioned women, didn't we? There were a lot of women in that communications center for the obvious reason that they were not in a combat zone and never would be in a combat zone. The radio men, that's the trade, the career path for enlisted. The radio men would, some go to sea and some stay on shore and back and forth and back and forth. The female sailors in that time were not on combatant ships. So they pretty much either went on non-combatant ships, supply ships, of which there are only a few, or they did shore assignments. The men would go on any ship or any submarine and then go on shore assignments. my 140 sailors, I probably had 12 men. The rest were women. Of the 3 officers at the place, I was male, the other 2 were women. And they were in a career path as officers where they were going to do communications their whole career. They were junior to me, and they knew that. That's what they were going to do. When they were done that tour, they were going to go to some other radio station for a whole career, you know. So they didn't really have ever any expectations of drawing shipboard assignment. Technically, they could have. They could have been assigned as the radio officer on a non-combatant ship. But again, there weren't that many. There still aren't that many non-combatant ships, and there were more people wanted. There were more energetic female officers and sailors who wanted those slots than there were slots to give out.
So, does your job assignment come with seniority? Like, do you get to choose your job assignments?
You get some say in the matter. When it's done, they call them orders. So I was on a ship. The ship was being decommissioned. So I now need a set of orders. You have a body in Washington. The Navy calls the job detailer. The other branches of the armed services have a different name for it. And technically, that is the person who sends out your orders where you're going to go to next. Now, their job is to keep all the commands and units and ships and stations filled with people. And they have files of who's going to leave when and who needs a replacement. When you're coming up for orders, I negotiated by telephone with the guy, and I said, I just really want to stay in Hawaii. And he made this offer and that offer, and none of them sounded really like what I wanted to do. And he kept looking, and he came up with this assignment to the radio station. Now, the way they work that is that particular command, the Area Master Station in Hawaii, they have a certain number of positions that are going to be filled by surface ship people. So, presumably, there was someone, although I never met him, I don't know who left that command right before I came. Now, within that command, where the captain of that unit decides to put people is entirely up to him. Crosswise to that, perpendicular to that, comes in the question of rank. At that time, I was a lieutenant commander. So the slot that I went to, the officer in charge slot, was graded for a lieutenant commander. There were probably 4 or 5 places within the island-wide unit that the captain could have had me go work. But what he got out of that was, in my particular position at the Pearl Harbor Center, I dealt with all the ships. So what my commanding officer got was he would get some mess up, some problem, and they'd go over to talk to the communications center, and they would find that the officer in charge wasn't a radio guy, he was a ship guy. And it really worked very nicely. The other thing that our communications center did, we were the radio point of view for the Pacific Fleet. And when I say the Pacific Fleet, you probably think of several hundred great ships that float in the water. And that's true, but those ships are not the fleet, they are assigned to the fleet. The Pacific Fleet is actually a 4-star admiral, and he has a staff of about 300 or 400 people. And they drive a building that's on a hill just above Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. But from there, they manage all the ships in the fleet. So I had a 4-star admiral in my building. Well, maybe I was in the admiral's building. And there are a lot of communications involved with a staff like that. We had a 4-star admiral, we had a 3-star admiral, I think we had 6, something like that, 2-star admirals. I don't even know how many 1-star admirals and captains we had. It's an old joke about, in a world like that, somebody like a Navy lieutenant makes the coffee. It's true. It really is true. They had staff meetings all the time. It was nothing to be walking down a hallway and have an admiral pass you. I mean, other than the cold sweat and clammy hands you had. We were a service unit. We provided something to them, communications. Things go wrong. In all honesty, my job when things went wrong was to go stand in a room and have somebody much senior to me vent for a while. Scream and yell and rant and rave, and then when he calmed down, I would promise to look into it, salute and leave. And when I figured that out, it got to be not so bad because, 9 times out of 10, there was was a mistake made, and the mistake was made by the staff. They didn't tell us what they wanted, they told us what they thought they wanted. And when we did what they said, then things went haywire. So then after the yelling was over, we had to diplomatically help them understand what they meant to say so that it would go right from there on. Every once in a while, there was a mistake made by one of my sailors. I had a stellar crew. I didn't really have any screw-ups in anything. Must have been some. I just had a great bunch. I mean, better by quality than most of the ones I dealt with on the ship. So, if people make a mistake, you live with that. Now don't do that again, okay? When you come back and they can see all the claw marks in your back, I'm just kidding. But, they realize, a junior sailor. They just screwed up bad, they made a mistake, and somebody way senior screamed at their boss for 10 minutes. And they feel horrible about it, Hey, I'm there to take the heat. You can do the job. I couldn't work that equipment if my life depended on it. But I can do, personnel and reporting and inspection. So, management, leadership.
Did you see any combat while you were on the ship in the Gulf?
I saw combat. The State Department and the United Nations would scream and yell over me saying that because we were not technically fighting. Two particular incidents come out in my mind, but before I start telling you about those, you have to understand we were in a war zone. We knew we were in a war zone. Our guns were loaded. Our defenses were turned on. We were within probably 3 minutes or less of fighting that ship, shooting guns, missiles, torpedoes, or whatever we had to do to prevail. And we did that day and night, round the clock, as long as we were at sea. In fact, we did pretty good when we were in port, supposedly relaxing. On a fairly regular daily basis, we would be in the water and the military forces of Iran would fly by, both the Iranian, I think they called it Air Force, and the Iranian Naval Air Units. Iran was at war, and that was the water on their doorstep, and reasonably speaking, they wanted to know who was there. So they patrolled daily, they patrolled by night sometimes. We had a United Nations, not, I'll say official, but we had informed via the United Nations that if you fly within 5 miles of a U.S. ship, we'll shoot you down and apologize later. Iran knew that. They respected that. We knew that most Iranian naval pilots had been trained in Pensacola, Florida. They believed that we would shoot them down, and they were very, very cautious to clearly report in and identify who they were. But still, you had military aircraft, armed, loaded, on a war patrol, flying overhead. We were armed, loaded, and just ready to defend ourselves if it came to that, You probably won't remember, but people listening to the tape will, the event of the USS Stark. Stark was a frigate and was shot by an Iraqi airplane. It was a mistake. Iraq apologized and paid millions of dollars, but 37 U.S. sailors died. I was on a ship just like the Stark. Same exact ship. I mean, I could read in the public press details, and I could see in the story in my mind. I mean, I went through in my mind, and I was not still on my ship at the time. I was back on shore duty, but I had been there. I had been on a ship of that class, and when they said where the missile hit, I could in my mind walk through that berthing compartment. I could tell you the names of my sailors who would have died, because I know where the missile hit. I know where the fire was. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. So we were in combat, very much so. 2 incidences, and I'll let you ask the next question. One, we had a military aircraft. We knew electronically it was military. In fact, we knew that it was a particular C-130, and we knew, in fact, that Iran had C-130s, and it was coming right at us. And we called it, and it wouldn't answer, and it wouldn't veer. And I say coming right at us, we picked it up, I don't remember, 40 miles away. Now it's 35 miles away. Now it's 30 miles away. I was on watch. I was the tactical action officer in charge of the CIC, the radar room. And it was my job to make sure that the ship was safe militarily during the time I was on watch. Called the captain in, the situation was developing and building, and this guy would not answer the radio calls. What are we going to do? And my mind is going through the steps of, okay, general quarters, launch a missile, I'm thinking like this. We finally identified him. turned out he was not from Iran, he was from Pakistan. Turned out he had a C-130 because they are our friends, they bought it from us. But it was a very tense couple of minutes there, and it could have gone the other way. We could have shot a combat-like event. Again, if you read the history, what was going on in that war, at one point, I don't know who started it, but both Iran and Iraq are oil exporters. For both of them, the most of their oil goes out by sea. They decided that if they shoot each other's oil tankers, the other side won't be able to sell any oil and they'll run out of money. And they call it today the tanker war. And they were shooting tankers, civilian ships. Now, we were well aware of this. I mean, it had happened for months before we got there. We responded to one event. We were on patrol. The Iranian war patrols were out on a daily basis. And again, through intelligence, we have electronic sensors in general. We can tell what kind of airplane's out there, you know. And the patrol planes kind of lumber along and they're in the sky for hours. American-built F-4 Phantom, famous from the days of Vietnam, they don't go on patrol. They go out to hunt and shoot. They don't stay in the air that long. So when we picked up one of those, we kind of knew something was going on. But, you know, in the world of Hollywood, people look at the radar and they know everything. You don't know so much. There is a lot of confusion. Well, I can remember, and I can see the guys' faces, I tell you, I can remember our technician on the electronic sensor when he picked up the fire radar, the missile radar from the F-4. And I can remember him screaming, he's pointing it at us. And we're like, ah! And I mean, everybody's throats went dry. Our voices went squeaky. And I mean, we didn't know if in 10 seconds we were going to have a missile coming at us. It would have taken a minute to 3/4 of a minute to get there, and presumably we would have hit the general quarters alarm, and people would have been grabbing helmets and slamming doors shut, and presumably we would have tried to shoot it down. But as quick as the report came, it went away. So he flew by us with his radar painting to where he was going to shoot his missile. We're still not sure where he was, but within 2 minutes, we're hearing on a non-military but a public radio Mayday call. Mayday, Mayday, I'm on fire, I've been shot, I've heard. It was a civilian tanker, and he had been hit by a missile. He was more than 60 miles away from us, because our helicopter could only fly 60 miles. But he was not much more than 60 miles away from us. So we, all engines, flank speed, rush over to humanitarian aid. And we got to the scene and found a tanker on fire. Interestingly, not seriously on fire. I mean, you know, they're full of oil, right? The oil wasn't burning, just the inhabited parts where the crew is. You know how a tanker is long and it's got a little thing on the back. The little thing on the back was on fire. I think they had one guy die. I think they had the second mate had his arm cut off. The captain of the ship, civilian captain, had some serious injury. Our helicopter landed. Our ship's corpsman went on board and gave emergency medical aid. Not very long after that, what country? UAE, United Arab Emirates, air-sea rescue helicopter, like our Coast Guard. It arrived, it landed. The really critically people were picked up and flown ashore to the hospital. I guess one of their engineering officers was burned, and they were left with only 2 officers on board. And their big problem they had was they had a helpless ship. It was just adrift. It had no power, no control. We stayed with that for a long time, all day, 14, 15, 16 hours. And what they kept telling us they wanted was, they wanted us to guide and shepherd them. What we understood they were saying, they knew it, we knew it, they knew we knew it, we knew they knew it, but nobody said it out loud. They wanted us to be within 5 miles of them, because the United States had already promised publicly to shoot down anybody that came within 5 miles. So they figured there was this bubble over top of us, and if they could just stay inside of that, and they were right, actually. I mean, people are dumb, especially when you've been shot. So in the end run, and it's a commercial ship, it's owned by a company. They had to communicate by satellite radio with their headquarters, wherever that was. The end result of it all was they decided that the ship needed to get to such and such a place and anchor. The company would fly more crew out to it and do repairs and everything. But they had no way to get there. They had no way to navigate, figure out where they were. They had very minimal control. So we guided them there. And, you know, not just us, but our superiors ashore in Bahrain and ashore in Washington, they're very scrupulously not letting America get involved in the war. I mean, we didn't want Iran to come back and shoot and finish them off. On the other hand, if I can say this, it wasn't our business. Okay? Granted, right after the shooting, we're there putting out fires, giving medical aid, and now we're helping these people get to a safe anchorage. It's a tricky thing, diplomatic, diplomacy and politics. We did lead them to an anchorage, and they anchored, and we went away. And I get this one for that, because one of my second and third hat, side job kind of a thing, I was our ship's intelligence officer, and the volume and the detail and the level of reporting in the reports we filed, they gave me a commendation medal over there. I'm like, okay. It was still a long day and I was still tired. And I still remember that, where it started with that airplane that we knew was about to shoot. And then it was about to shoot near us. We didn't know if it was pointed at us. And it didn't shoot us, it shot somebody else. It was a war zone.
Can you tell me about your medals and awards?
Well, okay. You have two kinds of medals. You have personal awards and you have unit awards. And there is some feeling within the officer levels that you kind of get a medal each successful career tour you do. You're on a ship for a period of time, and then when you transfer, it's tough. It's not automatic by any means, but a lot of people feel like if you transfer and go in and they didn't give you a medal, they're saying you didn't do a good job. So when you see a medal like this one with a star on it, that means I got that medal twice. I got this one on the USS Joseph Strauss, which was the ship that was decommissioned and leaving me in Pearl Harbor for shore duty. And then I got the second award on the USS Bella Wood, where I was the ship's navigator and we were stationed in Japan. The Navy Commendation Medal I already mentioned was for my reporting, my intelligence coverage of the shooting incident of the merchant tanker. My next one down here, this is the Meritorious Unit Commendation. This is one of those unit-wide awards. The ship was given the ribbon. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but the next time you're in a Navy base, look up at the bridge wings of the ship. You know when I say the windows at the fronts of the bridge. The bridge wings outside. Usually on the bridge wing, about that big, they'll have replicas of these ribbons painted. But they only paint up there the ship, the unit level awards. The ships don't get personal awards. That makes sense, right? So the Meritorious Unit Commendation was given to the USS Antrim for our duty performance in the Persian Gulf during the Iran-Iraq War. So I was on board, so I got that. The Battle E is the Navy-wide competition for best ship. It's actually best ship of class, so they don't give out one a year. They give out like 9 a year per ocean. Best ship of class Atlantic Ocean, best ship of class Pacific Ocean. So I was on the USS Bella Wood, and the Bella Wood won the Battle E. We got that. The red and yellow one is the National Defense Service Medal. That means I can breathe. If you're in uniform during a time of war, you get it.
Okay.
So I received this for my arduous duties ashore in Pearl Harbor during the Persian Gulf War. I'm being sarcastic here. I'll say that aloud for the sake of the tape. Everybody in got one. When they first opened up the window and said, "Oh, we're at war now, everybody gets a National Defense Service Medal," the old hands who had the National Defense Service Medal from Vietnam, they got to go get a star and put a star in theirs because they now had 2 of them. And they were pretty darn proud of that. But cool was my commanding officer. My commanding officer already had a National Defense Service Medal with a star. He got the medal in Korea. He got the star in Vietnam. He got a second star in the Persian Gulf War. There weren't many people around of his age still on active duty in 1991. I'm sure he's retired. I think he retired out of that job. The purple one is the Humanitarian Service Medal. Again, a unit award. When I was aboard the USS Bella Wood, a hurricane by the name of the Niki hit and did severe damage on the island of Kauai, Hawaii. And we were in the vicinity, so to speak, so we responded. We were help out with the relief efforts. So the ship was awarded the Humanitarian Service Medal. Again, a unit award, everybody on board got it. The next one is the Sea Service Deployment Ribbon. If you go on a deployment to sea and you're gone long enough, you get a Sea Service Deployment Ribbon. I have a star, meaning I've gotten 2 of them. Frankly, that's not many. People with as many years as I have in normally would have 4 or 5. Some people have 6, but they don't have a spouse. But what I do have, the one right next to it, is my overseas, what is the exact title? Overseas Service Ribbon. I have that with 2 stars on it, and that partly explains the lack of sea service deployment ribbons, because I was stationed on a ship in Japan. And because the ship was in Japan, we would never quite be gone long enough to get the deployment ribbon. We'd always come out like 4 days short. So were we away from our families? Yeah. Did we get this stinking ribbon? No. But for this one, if you're overseas based, you get one after a year. So I have it with 2 stars, meaning I got 3 of them. I got 3 overseas based. That's my ribbons.
Okay. What different places around the world have you been stationed?
What places have I been stationed? Well, having signed up, I'll say enlisted, from Florida, I went to Rhode Island for basic training, officer candidate school. My initial assignment coming out of Rhode Island, and I selected it. They had a board, a bulletin board with some 300 jobs on it. You went in based on your standing performance-wise. You picked whatever you wanted out of what was available. So I got to pick, and I was relatively early in the pack. I was assigned to St. Petersburg, Florida, where there was a Naval Reserve Center, where there was a minesweeper. Other than that ship, there was nothing else there. I went out to the ship. I was on the ship for 5 months. Then I returned to Rhode Island for another training school. Finished the training school 6 months later, went back to the minesweeper. In the meanwhile, the minesweeper had permanently relocated from St. Petersburg to Mayport, Jacksonville, Florida. So I was in Jacksonville, Florida for then 3.5 years. I finished my tour on that ship, went to a second ship, the Antrim, did 2 Persian Gulf deployments and some other work. Now, when I finished with the USS Antrim, I was selected and assigned to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Went to Monterey for 2.5 years, got a master's degree. Went back to Newport, another training command, another school tour of 6 months duty. From there, I went to a destroyer in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. I was in Pearl Harbor for a sea tour, decommissioned the ship, in Pearl Harbor for a shore tour. And from there, I was assigned to the USS Bella Wood. That ship was then assigned to Naval Station San Diego, moved to San Diego, lived in San Diego for 4 months, and the ship relocated to Japan on a permanent basis. We knew all this when we were going in. So we went from Pearl Harbor to San Diego for 4 months to a permanent move overseas. We lived in Japan for a year. At the end of the year, I was done with that. I was up for orders. I was very fortunate, I think. I was assigned to the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. Somewhat akin to our Annapolis or our West Point, all rolled into one school. Canada has a much smaller armed service. Their Army, Navy, Air Force are much more integrated than ours. And their faculty at that place has a permanent assignment for 1 American naval officer. Canada and the United States, friends, we trade people. And the idea is to keep our militaries well attuned and well influenced by each other. So I was sent there as a faculty member to teach, and unspoken but well understood, I was there to help the midshipmen and the cadets at the Royal Military College be exposed and introduced to the American military. I had all kinds of questions like, I hear you guys can get great tickets to Disney World. Yeah. I helped some people look up some stuff about that. I actually helped a couple people buy naval uniforms. It turns out Canada buys so few uniforms. The uniforms cost more. And they find it cheaper to buy them from the American Navy bases and pay for tailoring to get them altered. Their similar enough already that they don't cost, there's not that much alternating stuff. So a couple of guys came to me and said, would you help us out? And I said, yeah, I could do that. So then from Canada I retired. Accounting training schools, I didn't mention it. We lived in Virginia for 5 months. Florida, Virginia, Rhode Island, California, Hawaii, Japan, and Canada.
And how did you stay in touch with your family while you were at the
Letters.
different places?
Phone calls. We made those $12 a minute international trans-Pacific telephone calls. We didn't make a lot of them. We did a lot of letter writing. My wife and I wrote letters a lot when the ship was out to sea. I was usually on small ships. We did not receive mail at sea. But you'd pull into port, and there'd be 20 mail sacks waiting for you. So you'd get like 5 letters, and then the next day you'd get 5 more. We did not have access to personal email as they do now. I was on board the Bella Wood when they first began installing telephones for crew use, commercial telephones.
Did you have plenty of supplies in your station?
I don't think we ever ran out of anything. I saw that question on your list. The closest we ever came to running out of anything was I was once, I want to say low on fuel. The ship wasn't low on fuel, but we were a group of 4 ships, and because of the characteristics of the ships, 2 of them were very low. We were lower than we wanted to be, but we still had several days worth of fuel. Problem was there was a storm and we couldn't refuel. Our refueling was delayed by 3 days.
Wow.
And 2 of the ships of the 4 only carried 10 days worth of fuel in the first place. So a 3-day delay, they were pretty tight.
Yeah.
But that was weather.
Yeah.
Never hurt for food or bullets or parts. Well, we hurt for parts all the time because the one that breaks you don't happen to have on board, but we were supplied
Did you feel pressure or stress?
every day. I've said to my people where I work now, I've said, I get up in the morning, and I don't do this on a daily basis, but I still do it. And I'm brushing my teeth, and I look at myself and say, okay, what can go wrong today? And I go through a list, and I go, okay, is anybody going to die from that? Nope. Hey, this is going to be an easy day. It's all perspective. Being at sea is dangerous. Being at sea on a small ship with tons of fuel and hundreds of missiles, it's more dangerous. People get hurt. If there's anything amazing, and I think the public misses this, if there's anything amazing, is that so little goes wrong. I mean, stuff does go wrong, and it's news whenever it does, but it's really very rare when you consider the probabilities. So,
Did you do anything for good luck?
as a Christian, no. I belonged to Bible studies. We had Bible studies on the ship. Never quite as many as we wanted to, but we had fellowship with other Christians.
What did you do on leave? When you were on leave from duty?
I went on leave a number of times. As an officer, it typically wasn't easy to get permission to go away and do that. You typically saved up all your leave and took it between duty stations. So over the years, I had a couple of occasions where I had 30 days leave. I mean, I went on a 30-day vacation, which sounds luxurious, but I was granted, part of your compensation was 30 days leave a year, and I earned it up. And I and most other officers I knew, we earned it up so much we lost it. You can only save up so much, and then it goes away, and no, you don't get paid back for that. It's just, it evaporates. So I routinely lost leave. When the ship's at sea, of course, nobody goes away. Most of the crew, most of the enlisted men, like a ship will be coming back from deployment. They'll pick a small handful of guys, a dozen. And if you're coming, say back across the Pacific, you'll stop in Japan, and those guys will get leave and they'll fly home. And they'll be home 10 days before everybody else. And then when the ship pulls in, they come on board and they have duty that first night. so everybody else does get to go home that night. Officers don't participate in those kinds of things more often than not. So, had a couple of 30-day leaves between stations. You're in Rhode Island, drive to Hawaii, or drive to LA.
Drive to Hawaii.
Drive to LA, catch a flight, take 30 days to do it.
Okay. Do you recall the day your service ended?
Actually, only slightly. I had a kind of weird situation. I did retire because I was out of the country. I was in Canada. It works a little differently. Normally, when you retire, they have some sort of ceremony, some sort of going away party. Did not really ever expect that my Canadian co-workers and comrades would do that, and they didn't. I attended a few retirements of Canadians who were retiring from the Canadian Navy and Army, and I remember thinking as I did that, I'm not going to get this. But technically, you don't retire from a foreign country. Technically, you transfer. So, at my request, I was given the choice. I transferred to the Naval Weapons Station, Indianapolis, and I did that because I knew I was coming here. So technically, I was assigned to Indianapolis for one day. What that meant was on a day that I arranged, and they knew I was coming, and I was already living here, technically on leave. Put my uniform on one more time, drove down to Indy, filled out some papers, and drove back.
What did you do in the days and weeks afterward?
You mean right when I got out?
Mm-hmm.
I worked at Indiana West. Again, God smiled. I knew that, I thought I wanted to try teaching college, so my last assignment to teach college was at Natural. And I was probably better suited to get a job in academics because I was already doing that. I was hired by Indiana Wesleyan. Had to work out the Navy retirement process. I was retiring from the Navy, but the exact date wasn't set. Indiana Wesleyan hired me, and they wanted me the next month, and I had to say, I can't do that. I can't get out of the Navy that fast. So we worked it out that I came between the fall and spring semester, which meant we came at Christmas time. Cindy and the girls moved down here around 10th of December. I had to return. I drove down with them to move them down. I had to return to Canada, finish up a few things, and then I left and came down here. Had met Indiana Wesleyan, been on campus and all and whatnot, but had the rest of the Christmas break to go through the personnel office and get my keys to my office and unpack my books, and then be ready to start the spring semester. So I was busy. I was fortunate. I know many of my friends who retired and went unemployed for months.
Did the GI Bill affect you?
The GI Bill did affect me. The GI Bill from World War II era ended, and our friends in Congress, again, sarcasm, gave us something in its place called VEAP, which was horrible. And it was so horrible that it only took 3 years for the Navy to convince Congress recruitment was so far down, they had to bring back the GI Bill. So, they did. But those people who came in during those 3 years, that was me, we were stuck with the old one. And the original GI Bill, which was running out, there were people who were still in the service who were going to lose it because it was running out. Congress approved them passing from the old GI Bill to the new GI Bill. And the new GI Bill is a little less benefit, so they lost some money, but it was better than losing it all. And all of us in the middle 3 years screamed and yelled, they didn't care. We were stuck with it. The original GI Bill you did not pay into at all, and the benefits were enormous, and there was no deadline. The current GI Bill, you have to contribute $1,200. Typically, you pay $100 a month in the first 12 months you're in the service. And the benefits run out in 10 years. When you get out, if you haven't used it in 10 years, you lose it. You don't get your money back. But it's not hard to use, and it's a very good investment. Because of the technique by which I retired in the post-Soviet Union, make the Navy get small years, and they were doing lots of things to help us to decide to retire, because that was that many fewer people they had to kick out rudely. One of the things they did was they brought in and out all these programs. The program under which I retired allowed me to convert my interim VEAB to the new GI Bill. Just to compare, I got $2,700 cash back to me because I had to pay in more under the old one, plus my benefits tripled.
Wow.
So that's how bad that middle one was.
Jeez.
The GI Bill pays you so much a month while you're taking classes. I already had a master's degree, courtesy of the Navy, but as I've told you, I'm now taking a doctoral program. And I used every penny of my GI Bill and about twice as much again besides that in my doctoral program. I'm very glad I had it. If anybody hears this tape and they're considering signing up, take the GI Bill. You won't miss the $100 a month for the first 12 months.
Did you make any close friends while you're in the service?
Oh, many close friends. Stress does that. No, I mean that. If you're in a stressful situation, I haven't been to the beaches of Normandy or whatever, but I have no doubts when I hear these stories of the guys who, the people they were in combat with, lifelong buddies. If they haven't seen each other for 20 years, it takes them about that long to get back to closeness when they meet again. That's why veterans reunions are so emotionally touching. You know, not all of our stress was life and death, but it's a stressful life. We moved approximately every year. 2 occasions we lived in a particular Navy base, Navy community for 3 years in a row. We wanted to go because we moved in. We watched everybody else leave, all of our neighbors leave. We watched the people that came and replaced them. We watched all them leave. 2 different occasions I had 2 assignments in the same city. So we were there through a double rotation of neighbors changing. Everybody you know at church, everybody you know in your home Bible study, everybody you know on your ship, your duty station, they all go away. And when you look around and you've been there longer than anybody, it's time for you to go away. But that's stressful. You know, packing up your whole house and moving. The Navy family solves its problems. Usually, you move in, and within a few weeks, somebody probably next door or down the block, and you might not even know Mo, and you might, they come into your kitchen with the box. Because the mustard and the teriyaki sauce and the half bag of rice and the open bag of flour, you can't take that stuff with you. So there's a box, and you just put it all in the box, and you give it to whoever's relatively new in the neighborhood. And then 2 years later, when you move, put it all back in the box. It's probably the same cardboard box. So stuff like that goes on. I mean, stuff you wouldn't even think of. Again, in my era, the Navy was even more heavily male at sea than it is today. It's still mostly. There's fewer women than men. But when the ship went to sea, that meant you had 40 or 50 families with no father at home. And, I mean, it not only was common, it was routine. If your next door, and you weren't always buddies with your next door neighbors. I mean, housing was assigned, right? You knew them, you got along, but if they went to sea, I would stop in on my way home that night, and I'd knock on the door, and you knew each other, and I'd say, you know, if you need anything, if the car breaks, if the plumbing breaks, and the base won't come fix it. I need to say this in a pure sense. We shared our men. The men who were around just took care of all the families who were there. We just did it. Everybody did. Even the people you didn't like very well did it. You know, and frankly, as a married man going to sea for months and leaving my wife ashore, that was very comforting to me, to know that people were taking care of her. And then that wasn't always your neighbors because you were assigned housing, but the people of the unit. You had all the men on the ship and you had all the wives. They had a wives club. They always had 2 big parties. They had a dinner out, boisterous party at the halfway mark of the cruise. They always did that. And then they had a coming home party. The coming home party would be like a month before. And what they would do as a party event is they would make up the banners and signs and all that you always see on the pier. When the ship pulls in, there's all the newborn babies that the fathers haven't met, and the crying women and the bands playing. You always see posters. Well, the Wives Club made those posters at the coming home party, which was roughly a month before the ship came in. See? So it's all organized. It all,
Yeah.
You should have Cindy in here and be asking her too.
How did your service experiences affect your life?
Till I came here, it was my life. Straight from college to active duty Navy career till I retired.
lastly, is there anything you'd like to add we've not covered?
I would recommend it to anybody. And I say that knowing this, it isn't for everybody. I think every young man and woman should go enlist. And I say that knowing the vast majority will do one hitch, 4 years, and get out. And they'll be a better person for it. But some will just love it. I mean, it's hard. You don't actually love it day by day, hour by hour. But when you look back on it, the good outweighs the bad. I mean, we went places. We went to balls with the ambassadors. We toured foreign countries. We did all kinds of stuff that you would never be able to do otherwise. And you won't know if you don't try it. I mean, I'm sure there are people who would really enjoy it who never give it a try. So I would say it anyway. Sign up, try it. What have you got to lose? 4 years of your life.